Well, our final talk of this special assembly day will be given by a visiting speaker, which of course is Brother Bell. This talk is, Pay Constant Attention to Divine Instruction. Let us now welcome our visiting speaker to deliver this special talk, Peter Bell.
When we heard that the faithful slave were considering purchasing new equipment for the branches, new printing equipment, we were naturally interested and hoped that we would be included. So we're very pleased to hear that we were going to be getting the fifth of the new presses that they were going to buy. However, in the history of buying printing presses, 2 years ago was the best time in 100 years to be buying a printing press, because the German economy was in recession, and the company that makes the best printing presses in the world had an empty order book. So instead of getting the presses, normally the first one would have taken 2 years to arrive, and the next ones every 18 months, we suddenly heard that they wanted to produce the first press in 6 months, the next one in 3 months, and the next ones in 1 month intervals. So our delight turned to fear when the governing body rang our branch and said, because we were the only people who had space in the factory, could we go from being number 5 to number 1? Now the press we've had for 24 years, the Harris press, runs at 32,000 magazines an hour. That's 533 magazines a minute, 8.8 magazines a second. The second press that we inherited from France, the Hancho press, runs at 38,000 magazines an hour. That's 633 magazines a minute, 10.5 magazines a second. But the new press that we've just installed runs at 90,000 magazines an hour. That's 1,500 magazines a minute, 25 magazines a second. Now the most expensive thing that we buy as an organization is paper. It's 90% of the cost of printing. And normally in commercial printing companies, the average waste, we're told, is 8 to 14%. Now last year, in our factory, even with the new press and the fact that we were inexperienced, the average waste was 3.2%. Now why do we do so well? During the time while we were specifying the new press, I had to ring a worldly company and ask them about a piece of equipment that we were putting on. A man I'd never talked to before in a big printing organization down in East Anglia. And I rang him up and said to Mr. Newman, my name's Peter Bell of Watchtower, and I wonder if I could ask you your advice on a piece of equipment we want to buy for our new MAN press. He said, Peter, it's John. Oh, I said, well, thank you, John. So I explained the question that we had because we were printing Bibles. There were 2 pieces of equipment we could buy. This piece we wanted to buy, we wondered how it would be on Bible paper and so on. He said, yes, he said, it is a bit fiddly to set up. He said, and you need to keep it clean. He said, but you won't have any problem. So I said, what do you mean I won't have any problem? He said, well, you've got something, Peter, that I can't buy. So I said, what have I got that you can't buy? He said, you have press ownership. Your men own the machine. I can only employ people to work on my machines, but your men own their printing press. I said, well, how do you know about our men? He said, listen, Peter, everybody in the trade talks about you. He said, I'm a Baptist myself, he says. I really admire what your organization and your young men do on printing on that press. And all the reps come in and they tell us what a wonderful job they do. Now that was really nice to get that little recommendation back from a worldly company, but why is it that the brothers do so well? Well, when the brothers come into Bethel and we're choosing a new operator on the printing press, it doesn't matter what they're doing, if they're cleaning floors or any other job they're doing, what we look for is, do they pay attention? You see, when you're running a printing press, whether it's 8 magazines a second or 10 magazines a second or 25 magazines a second, if you don't pay attention, you can soon fill up the waste paper bins. See, usually when we're looking at a magazine, there's a few things which are really important and other things are of less importance. So if we teach them what to look for and they pay attention, then we can save a lot of waste. It's the same with life. In life, There are so many things that demand our attention, but there are very few things that are really important. If we learn what's really important and pay attention to these few things, the rest of life falls into place. So what's the most important thing that we have to learn? Well, the first rule that we need to learn is this. When Jehovah speaks, give his instruction priority. When Jehovah speaks, give his instruction priority. Now that's brought to our attention by a very well-known text that we almost know backwards. But before we read the text, let's read the context. Turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. Now just glancing down through Matthew chapter 6, we notice verse 1 through to verse 15 is really about prayer. So there Jesus explains how to pray, what we should pray for. 16 through to 18, he talks about fasting and not being a hypocrite. But then in verse 19, he starts to talk about the affairs of life and talks about material things. He tells us in verse 19 to 21, don't place your trust in material things. They're only going to rot and rust anyway. In verse 22, keep your life simple. Verse 24, you can't slave for two masters, either material things or spiritual things. And then in verses 25 through to 32, he tells us never to worry about material things. And then we come to that really well-known verse, or verses 33 and 34. So let's just read that now we've looked at the context. It says, keep on then seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. So what's the most important thing in life? Keep on seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. That is the first rule of life. But normally we're naturally worried about, are we going to make ends meet and things like this? But notice what he says next. So you can be anxious on occasion. I understand that. I'll understand if you're worried from time to time. Is that what he says? He says, so never be anxious about the next day. For the next day will have its own anxieties, sufficient for each day is its own badness. Now, who would you rather have looking after your material affairs in life? Would you rather depend on yourself, or would you rather have the creator of the universe doing the worrying for you? What would you prefer? Isn't it obvious that if Jehovah says, look, the worry belongs to me, never be anxious, put me first and I'll care for everything that you need in a material way, isn't that an obvious answer? So brothers, have we learned that simple lesson? Put Jehovah first and everything else will fall into place. See, we learned in our talk this morning that Jehovah bent over backwards to teach Israel that simple rule. Listen to me, do what I tell you, and the blessings will pursue you, they'll overtake you, you can't escape from them. So if we want to be successful in life, we have to put Jehovah first. So when a trainee printer picks up a magazine from the printing press, we teach him three things to look for. Three main things. If these three main things are okay, we can save the magazine. So the first thing we tell him to look for is the fold and the glue. We have certain little rules on the fold, how many letters were allowed and things like this. I won't bore you with it, but basically we always check the center page spread and make sure that the fold is correct and we've got glue on all the pages. That's the first thing they have to learn. The second thing they need to learn is that all the colors are in what we call registration, that you haven't got like a rainbow around the edge, that one's on top of the other. If it's nice and sharp, good registration, we call that. And the final thing, the way that we print with this particular printing method is a balance of ink and water. If you don't have enough water, all the ink scums, we call it, or smudges. And if you've got too much water, it washes out. So those three simple things. Is the fold right? Is the glue? Is the registration okay? And then finally, are the ink and water balance okay? Now there may be other things wrong with this magazine, but you would never know it. Those three things mean we can save the magazine. It's the same with life. There's three simple things we want to speak about this afternoon. You get these three things right, and everything else falls into place. The first thing is something we've already touched on. Pay attention when Jehovah speaks. That's the first rule of life. Pay attention when Jehovah speaks. The second point, pay attention to the teachings and the example of his Son. A little bit different that, to the teachings and the example of his Son. And finally, pay attention to the instructions and the provisions of the faithful and discreet slave. Pay attention to the instructions and provisions of his faithful and discreet slave class. So I'll just go through those again if you're taking notes. Pay attention when Jehovah speaks. Pay attention to the teachings and the example of his Son. Pay attention to the instructions and the provisions of the faithful and discreet slave class. But let's take that first point and see what we can learn from it. Pay attention when Jehovah speaks. Our theme scripture for this part of the talk is Proverbs chapter 2, and we want to read 3 verses. Proverbs chapter 2, and we want to read verse 1, verse 2, and verse 9. There it says, "My son, if you will receive my sayings and treasure up my own commandments with yourself, so as to pay attention to wisdom with your ear, that you may incline your heart to discernment," and then turn to verse 9. "In that case, you will understand righteousness and judgment and uprightness, the entire course of what is good." So we can get everything that we need by listening to Jehovah. You know, when we first saw the new printing press for the first time, we went to some outside companies. You see, our Harris press is only about this high. The Hancho press is about this high. But the MAN press, you wouldn't get it on the platform. If you've not seen it yet, it's somewhere in the region of 4 meters high. So probably about 3 brothers high. And when we first saw it, we thought, we'll never be able to work that. It's too big for us. It's too complicated. So we said to the governing body, look, this is a big change for us. We don't think that we're really up to it. We think we ought to pay for some training for ourselves and the other branches in the factory in Augsburg. And they agreed. Because of the cost of paper, we said you'd soon save that in paper. So we all had 3 weeks training in Augsburg in Bavaria. Now, we were nervous when we went there, so we really paid close attention while they were instructing us, because we imagined ourselves getting back home and never being able to work this press. So we were there early in the morning, and we stayed till late in the evening, and the men said, well, we've never had people like you here. Usually you treat it as a booze cruise, you know, the lads come from the factories, they're just here for the pubs and so on. And they really responded very well, so much so they said at the end of the course, they said, you've shown so much interest, we think we should extend this course free of charge by an extra day, because we can't answer all the questions in the time that you're here. We learned the importance of factory settings. Now, the cylinder on the new printing press is about 6 feet wide, and we've got 32 pages around each cylinder. And yet the difference between success and failure is 1/1000th of an inch. Now, if you don't know what 1/1000th of an inch is, feel one of your hairs, and you feel that on top of your head. I have to search for mine these days. If you can feel one of them, your average hair is 3/1000ths of an inch thick. And we've got 1/3 of that to get good printing, so you need to be right on the money. So every time we make an adjustment on the machine, we get out the manuals and we make sure that we set it according to the manufacturer's instructions. MAN comes in now and they treat us as their showroom in London. They said, we love you guys because every time we come here, you're running at full speed, 90,000 an hour. We said, well, that's what we bought it for, 90,000 an hour. You know, if it does 90,000, we run black line all the time. They've sold 5 printing presses already this year by bringing people in to see the press that we're running. So it's the same with life. Here it is. Here's the manufacturer's instructions. The difference between success and failure, brothers, is 1/1000th of an inch. Really, you've got to pay attention to the details that Jehovah gives us. It's all here in the scriptures. And just like us with the printing press, we don't just wait till things go wrong before we get the manual and think, well, what do the manufacturers say here? The most important thing is preventative maintenance. If we know that something's going to wear out after 300 hours on the press, we change it at 250 hours, and then it never breaks down. And that's what we have to do with life. Learn beforehand what the manufacturer says, and you save yourself a lot of trouble. So the question is, are you reading the manual? Now, we're not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of you are reading God's Word, the Bible, daily? Does it seem to you to be something a bit too much to do? Can we set you a little challenge? Can we challenge you to read 5 verses a day? If you're not already reading the Bible, can we please, after this assembly, set you the challenge and think to yourself, okay, I can't read too much, but I'll read 5 verses a day. How long would that take? How many seconds would that take? Now, the reason that we challenge you to do that is because you'll never do it. You know what happens if you read 5 verses a day? You see, you start reading 5 verses, and what happens? You think, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what the rest says. You can't keep to 5 verses a day. So that's why we set you the challenge. If you're not already reading God's Word, the Bible, daily, to get yourself started, try 5 verses a day and see how you'll get hooked on the manufacturer's instructions. This is even more important in view of the times in which we're living. If we look at 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19, do you remember we had this scripture in the Watchtower about 2 months ago? 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 19. It says there, consequently, we have the prophetic word made more sure, and you're doing well in paying attention to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place until day dawns and a day star rises in your hearts. Now, do you remember what that scripture means? If we take one little phrase out, which is put in really out of alignment with the main thought, maybe it'll make it easier. Let's read it this way. Consequently, we have the prophetic word made more sure, and you are doing well in paying attention to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place in your hearts. Do you remember that? That the dark place that needs illumination is our heart. And when we read God's Word, the Bible, it gets in there and it's like putting a torch in a dark place. It shows us where we've got to make changes. It illuminates this dark place, the human heart, and shows us what we've really got to do in the future, especially as it says, the day dawns and a day star rises. Since the time that Jesus Christ has taken up kingdom rule, we're living in that time. We are living in the time when the day star has risen. So we need to illuminate our hearts with God's Word. So that's the first rule to successful living. Pay attention when Jehovah speaks. Read the manufacturer's manual. Read it beforehand, do preventative maintenance, and we can be successful in life. What about the second point? Pay attention to the teachings and example of God's Son. When we were ready to print on the MAN press, we'd taken somewhere in the region of 3 months to put the press all together. Then just before we started printing, they sent somebody to us who had been working on MAN presses for 30 years. This man, his name was Gerd Mikkelmarsen. And when Gerd Mikkelmarsen came along, he wasn't a man who just knew what the manufacturer's manual had to say. He was somebody who had been putting it into practice for 30 years. So when we started up the press for the first time, he was standing at the elbow of our young brothers and saying, okay, just do this, do that, take it up first of all to 25,000, and then we'll just check this. Now take it up to 50,000, we'll check that. Now take it up to 70,000, we'll check. Now take it up to 90,000. Okay, shut it down, we need to do this, and so on. And so it was so much better. You had somebody there who knew what they were doing. And Jehovah has done the same for us. When it comes to applying the things that are in the manual, he sent a demonstrator to us. Someone who could demonstrate how it would really work in action. Somebody who was experienced for billions of millions of years. We know who that is, but just in case, turn to Matthew chapter 17 and verse 5. Here looking at the time of the Transfiguration, Matthew chapter 17 and verse 5, it says, "While he was yet speaking, look, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and look, a voice out of the cloud saying, 'This is my Son, the beloved, whom I have approved. Listen to him.'" There we have the manufacturer's stamp of approval. He said, "This one really knows how to apply my words. Listen to what he says, and you'll never go wrong. Jesus Christ." So, not only are we reading the scriptures, are we looking at the example of Jesus Christ and how he actually applied the scriptures in his life. If we follow his example, we can see how a human can really apply God's word. Notice, for example, how Jesus illustrated the benefits of applying the lessons we can learn in Jehovah's word. Turn now back to Matthew chapter 7 and look at one of the illustrations that he used. Matthew chapter 7, and we got verses 24 through to 27. Jesus said, "Therefore, everyone that hears these sayings of mine and," you notice what? "does them, will be likened to a discreet man who built his house upon the rock mass. And the rain poured down, and the floods came, and the winds blew and lashed against that house. But it didn't cave in, for it had been founded upon the rock mass. Furthermore, everyone hearing these sayings of mine and not doing them will be likened to a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rains poured down, and the floods came, and the winds blew and struck against that house, and it caved in, and its collapse was great." So you notice the difference? Two identical houses on two different foundations. And what was the difference? The difference was those who hear these sayings of mine and do those sayings of his. So we're all hearing it this afternoon. Are we doers of the word also? See, it's like when we got the new press. Before we installed the press, we had a meeting with MAN, and they came in and they said, "Where are you going to put this new press in the factory?" And we said, "Well, we got this area here where we used to have the bookstore and so on." And they said, "What's the floor like?" And we said, "Oh, it's a great floor. It's really strong." And they said, "Well, how thick is it?" Oh, we said, "It's about 9 inches or 230 millimeters." They said, "Uh-oh, that's all got to come up." "What do you mean it's all got to come up? It's a good floor." The rule of thumb, they said, is the foundation has to be 3 times the weight of the press. The press weighs 280 tons. So we had to cut out all of the concrete from the floor, and we had to dig down 1 meter to 1.5 meters and fill it with 800 tons of concrete and steel reinforcement. Why did we have to do that? They said, when this press is running at 90,000 an hour, if it sets up sympathetic vibrations in the concrete, the press will walk off its foundations. It'll go out of line, and you'll never be able to print on it. Give it enough mass underneath, and it'll just sit there as calm as anything, and it will never move. So that's what we did. And you can go up to that machine running at 90,000 an hour. There's no vibration on it at all. It never moves. And it's the same with us. You see, if we listen and do what Jehovah God tells us, following the example of Jesus Christ, we stay set in our position in the truth. We will never move. We'll be on that strong foundation. So you notice how often listening comes into the qualifications of those who follow Jesus. For example, look at another well-known scripture, but have you ever noticed this before? Turn to John chapter 10, verse 16. We normally use this when we talk about the future hope for the majority of mankind. But have you noticed this, the qualifying factor? John chapter 10 and verse 16. Jesus says there, "And I have other sheep which are not of this fold. These also I must bring, and they will listen to my voice, and they will become one flock, one shepherd." Did you notice the qualification to be one of the other sheep? It is that we have to listen to the shepherd's voice. And turn over the page to verse 27. Here it says again, "My sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Now, of course, that may be a bit strange to us. They've got a few sheep in Lincolnshire, haven't they? And we know how they treat sheep in Lincolnshire as they do in the rest of the British Isles. When they're dealing with sheep, they use dogs. And the shepherd comes into the field and he rounds the sheep up by use of the dogs. Very, very clever, but not like the Bible times. They didn't push the sheep in Bible times, did they? They led the sheep, and the shepherd knew all the sheep by name, and all the sheep knew the shepherd. And when the shepherd spoke, they listened to him. Have you ever seen that in real life? We once had an assignment to Malta, and the brother there said, you know, we've got a shepherd on the island with a mixed flock of sheep and goats, and sometimes you see him walking down the road talking to the sheep. Oh, we said, we'd love to see that. He said, come on, we'll go. So that evening we drove over the hill and we came upon this shepherd, and he's walking down this mountain road, and there's all these goats and lambs and sheep, and he's talking to them all the time. We got out of the car and we walked along with him. Didn't speak much English, but we could speak to him. And he was talking to the little lambs, and they were just following him as he was taking them home in the evening. Absolutely fantastic to see that. But a friend of mine in Scotland had an even better experience. He was on holiday in Cyprus. And while he was on holiday, it was coming down to twilight, and he saw this shepherd coming down the hillside back to the little farm, and there were 2 pens. And as he came down the hill, this big mixed group of sheep and goats came down the hill behind the shepherd, and he was talking to them as he went. And as he got to the 2 pens, all the goats peeled off and went to the left-hand pen. And all the sheep peeled off and went to the right-hand pen. And he was absolutely amazed. And he went up to this old shepherd. He said, you know, he said, I'm a Bible student and I've always read about that. He said, but I've never seen anything like that in my life. He said, how did you train them to do that? So the old shepherd said, I did not train them. Well, he said, how is it? He said, all the sheep went to the right. He said, and all the goats went to the left. So he thought for a minute, and he said, I know. They know that they are sheep. And they know that they are goats. Simple. And then the brother noticed in the middle of the goats was a little lamb. And he said to him, well, what about that one? He said, he doesn't know yet that he's a sheep. But he will learn. Now, brothers, do we get the point of that illustration? Do we know whether we're sheep or goats? Where do we go to in the evenings? Who do we associate with? Are we like that little lamb that we don't realize yet we're a sheep and we're in the middle of the goats? Or do we appreciate that we're a sheep and we associate with the sheep? We listen to the voice of the master and we stay firmly with the sheep. That's the lesson really to learn, isn't it? We listen to the shepherd. How do we prove that we're really listening to the shepherd? Well, let's reason on John chapter 18 and verse 37. John chapter 18 and verse 37. Therefore Pilate said to him, well then, are you a king? Jesus answered, you yourself are saying that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone that's on the side of the truth listens to my voice. Brothers, are you on the side of the truth? That may seem a silly thing to ask. Of course we are, you say. Well, what is the truth? We look up the Insight volume. The truth is defined in this way. The Hebrew term is the word emeth. It may designate that which is firm, trustworthy, stable, faithful, true, or established as fact. That's truth. Established as fact. Faithful, true. The Greek word aletheia stands in contrast with falsehood or unrighteousness, and denotes that which conforms to fact or to what is right and proper. That's the truth. You know, sometimes we meet people in the ministry and we talk to them about the truth and they say, what is truth? You know, the truth to you may not be the truth to me, and they go on, don't they, and so on. That's a load of rubbish, isn't it? The truth is the truth. And it's the same, for example, when it comes to what we've learned on the printing press. The manufacturer gives instructions and says, what you do when you set the cylinders is this, and it has to be set this way, otherwise the guarantee is voided. If you do anything else, you're on your own, chum. You do it our way, and then we'll guarantee the performance of this machine. Now, it's the same with life. Now, are we on the side of the truth when it comes to difficult matters? One of the examples that the governing body have given us in the outline, for example, is when it comes to marriage. Are we on the side of the truth when it comes to marriage? See, marriage is under attack today, and there's so much worldly propaganda about marriage, isn't there? And could that infiltrate the Christian congregation? Yes, it could. Yes, it has. Because brothers say, well, you know, now and again, you're not really compatible. Now and again, things go wrong and you just can't stay together. Now and again, you know, you found that you haven't really married your soulmate. And you've got to do something about it. That is worldly reasoning, isn't it? What did Jesus Christ say? He said to the disciples, there's only one ground for breaking marriage, and that is adultery on the part of one partner. So do we feel that way? Once we've made an agreement in the sight of Jehovah God, will we do anything to live the truth according to what Jesus Christ told us to do? You know, you find a little formula develops. We find that married couples sometimes have difficulties, so they have a separation for non-scriptural reasons. And after the separation for non-scriptural reasons comes the non-scriptural divorce. And then after the non-scriptural divorce, neither of them likes his situation, and so it becomes then the token act of immorality. Now we've done that, we've cleaned the plate, and we can start all over again. Well, you may have been through that system, and you may get away with it with men, but are you living the truth? Are you going to get blessed by Jehovah in doing that? We know difficulties come in all marriages. Do we apply the manufacturer's instructions and do what we can to live the truth according to the manufacturer's instructions? That's the only way that we're going to get blessed in that way. So we have to think about it. It isn't just knowing the truth. Yes, I know the truth. There's no Trinity. I know the truth about everlasting life and the immortal soul. We know the truth about how to live. Are we applying it? Only in that way, by following the example and the teachings of Jesus Christ, will we be blessed. Now, our last point is paying attention to the provisions of the faithful slave. Now, the manufacturer of our press is a company called MAN Roland. They're based in Bavaria in the beautiful little city of Augsburg. But that's a long way away. It's at least a 2-hour plane ride. We can communicate to the manufacturers by email, telephone, and we can use the fax machine. But we don't need to, because they have a branch right here in the UK, happily, right in London. So if we've got problems, we can go straight to the local branch. And the same is true of our spiritual organization. We have free and open communication with Jehovah God and Jesus Christ through prayer. We can listen to what Jehovah has to tell us by reading his word. But in the case of local difficulties, we have a local organization that he set up right here on earth, don't we? It's described for us in Luke chapter 12 and verses 42 through to 44. Luke chapter 12 and verses 42 through to 44. And the Lord said, who really is the faithful steward, the discreet one, whom his master will appoint over his body of attendants to keep giving them their measure of food supplies at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. I tell you truthfully, he will appoint him over all his belongings. Now, we've read that many times, but did you notice the really key point here, how we can identify the faithful and discreet slave? It's the one who would be providing spiritual food in the right measure at the right time. What do you think about the spiritual food that you receive? Do you get enough? Do you find that you're really desperately starving spiritually? You know, when we get a new magazine like this, here's the new one, June the 8th. Look, June the 8th. You see, this is on the press at the moment. When the new magazines arrive at the literature desk, do you think to yourself, oh, thank goodness, I'm dying for something to read? No. Are you like me? You think, oh, no, not another one. I haven't read the last one yet. Have you noticed that there's a real pressure for spiritual food? Have you noticed what's happened to the theocratic school lately? See, 3 years ago, the amount of material that you had to study for the theocratic school was quite small, wasn't it? Have you noticed how much it's increased? And the Bible reading's increased and so on. What's the matter with the governing body? Don't they appreciate that you're busy people? Have they lost touch with us all? See, no, brothers, they realize that the pressure from the world is getting greater, and we have to increase the interior pressure if we're going to resist the pressure of the world. And so the spiritual food is getting more to keep us healthy, spiritually healthy. Do we appreciate what they're really doing for us at this time? See, before we bought the printing presses, we had a team of brothers, an international team of brothers that were really good at engineering, and they went round the world with a shopping list. And they said, well, we want the press to do this, we want it to do that, we want it to do the other. And they got down to 3 companies worldwide, MAN, Koenig & Bar, and Mitsubishi. And they visited all the plants and said, who can do this, who can do that, who can do the other? And then we found a company that could do exactly what we wanted, or near enough what we wanted, and were prepared to build what we wanted. They found that they were also the most expensive, so we then played them off against the cheapest until we got the best deal that we could on that. Now, we have to do something similarly spiritually. We have to think who really is providing the spiritual food at this time and support that arrangement. We identify it as the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide today. So have you stopped to consider what's involved in providing spiritual food worldwide for our brotherhood? All the work in writing, translating, printing, distributing in 235 lands now in 400 languages. I don't know if anybody here went to the Maltese Assembly last year. Anybody went to Malta last year? I can't see any hands, no. There's about 600 brothers on Malta. Last year at the Assembly, do you know what the brothers received? They received the New World Translation in Maltese. You know, when they received that New World Translation, the brothers were crying. They said, we're only 600. How many years did it take for the brothers to translate the whole Bible in Maltese? And they've done that for us, just 600 brothers. You know, what other organization would spend time on that? You know, when we, in 1983, decided that we had to go from hot metal to electronic phototypesetting, we looked at what was available in the world market, and yes, we could go electronic phototypesetting, providing you spoke German, French, Spanish, and English. Maybe Danish and Swedish as well, something like that. But already we were printing in 200 languages, so what do we have to do? We had to build it ourselves. And over the years, we keep looking, can we buy a commercial system that would save us all this time? We're now up to 400 languages. Who else handles this number of languages? Nobody except the faithful and discreet slave. Have you thought about all the work in that? All the translating, all of the things that are necessary to make this work. Now we have 100 branches working worldwide. We have 17 major printing branches running rotary presses like ourselves. And for example, we've just sent a rotary press into Nigeria. So one of the presses from Brooklyn was sent down to Nigeria. Brothers were sent down there to set it up because they have over 200,000 publishers, more than we do. And they were printing all of their magazines on a sheet-fed machine. But what do you think they need to support that press in Nigeria? They can't get a nut and bolt in Nigeria. So we have to send everything. We have to send all the paper, all the ink, all the glue, the fountain solution. Everything they need has to be sent in, and most of it comes from this branch. So you brothers are to be richly commended for the way that you support the worldwide work. Through your donations, you look after the work in Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, South Africa. South Africa, we put a big new press down there, one just like ours, but everything for it has to come from out of the country. They can't get anything there. You brothers are mainly supporting that work. You're doing a wonderful job in that way. Worldwide now, we can print 2.1 million magazines every hour with the 17 rotary presses that we have worldwide. And then we've got two big sheet-fed branches now. We've got India and we've got Finland that are printing large amounts of magazines on sheet-fed machines. In Britain, the Bethel family now numbers 550, and it cares for the need of 1,493 congregations in the British Isles, 1,493 in 33 languages. Did you notice in the newspapers that they said in London now there are over 280 languages spoken in the schools in London? Amazing, isn't it? And we're supporting all of that work. We're providing literature and magazines to some 20 other countries as well. For example, like the Congo. The big difference there is, you know, when you place a magazine in this country, you go back and you say to the person, did you get time to read that magazine? Well, we don't do that because it's a waste of time saying that, isn't it? You know, it's a killer. Because we know that the majority of cases they don't read them. You place a magazine in the Congo and everyone will read it. If you go into a government office, whatever the ministry is, and you go into the government office, there will be a coffee table. And on the coffee table, there won't be Time magazine and Newsweek. There'll be the Watchtower in Swahili, the Watchtower in Shaluba, the Watchtower in Lingala, the Watchtower in French. The only good quality magazines they can get in these places is the Watchtower and the Awake. And everybody reads them, and if you place it with a family, you can be sure that at least 10 people are going to read that magazine. It's fantastic, the increase that we're getting out there. Interestingly, last year, for the sake of the Bethel family, we asked, how are the magazines delivered? And one of the missionaries sent us back a picture of a brother with a bicycle. One of these big old-fashioned sort of sit-up-and-beg bicycles, not your mountain bike, the old things with the old metal, you know, brakes on it and, you know, ball tires. And he was up to his knees in red swamp water, and he had a big broad-brimmed hat, and on the back of the bike he had 110 kilos of magazines wrapped in a tarpaulin. And this brother's a special pioneer, and every month he does the round trip from London to Stockton-on-Tees through the jungle on his bike to deliver 110 kilos of magazines. It's just fantastic, and you think the appreciation that these brothers have for the magazines, and all of that's happening because of your support. Many thousands of our brothers worldwide are dependent on the provisions that we make available for them in London. It's a real privilege to do that. But we need something in London, Bethel, and we need it all the time because we have a turnover. One elderly brother said about Bethel, used to be in Bethel, he said, the Lord brings them in, but the women take them out. So we call it natural wastage. But can we encourage you parents to encourage your youngsters to think about a full-time career in full-time service, and particularly think about Bethel service. We know not everyone's going to stay there for the rest of their lives, but it's a very good training for the future, whatever you come to do the rest of your life. Particularly now, you notice that the governing body is recommending education, but not further education in university, education perhaps in a trade, like plumbers. We've got at least 2 plumbers here in the audience from your circuit, which we're very grateful for, because plumbers are like hen's teeth. They're very difficult to get, plumbers these days, but they're really urgently required. One brother is a plumber in our circuit. He has a little cutting on his fridge. Talks about the number of people that are getting university degrees in unusual subjects, you see, which are not really practical. And this little cutting said, when was the last time you needed an emergency sociologist? But what about an emergency plumber? You know, an emergency plumber, well, I mean, he can charge the earth. It's a license to print money now, isn't it, you see? So those sort of skills, electronics, engineering, those things, now the brothers in Bethel are doing great work. At the moment, we're building 12 gluing systems for the other presses worldwide, a little development that we did in London, and we will save anything from £300,000 to £400,000 by building these gluer systems ourselves in Bethel. The brother who's running the CNC mill used to work on Renault Formula One engines, and he's running the mill for us. Another brother who's working in the electronics department, he's a kind of wizard. He could do anything with electronics. Whatever we give him, he can design. So it's a wonderful team spirit to be involved in these things. And when brothers come to Bethel, we try to increase their education. So youngsters, if you're thinking about a career in the future, why set yourself a goal of a career that can soon come to the end in this old system of things? Think about a career that's going to last forever, the full-time service. And if you spend some time in Bethel service, that will really set you up for the future. I would like to talk to a Bethelite or an ex-Bethelite. This is Brother Anthony Eason, and Anthony used to be in Bethel a few years ago, so let's just talk to Anthony and see what we can learn from him. So Anthony, when did you go to Bethel?
That was back in 1989.
And how long did you stay?
For 10 years up to 1999.
So what did you do when you were in Bethel?
Well, initially I was asked to be a factory janitor, and then I was transferred into the printery.
So you had a very good overseer when you were in the printery?
Well, he was a shocker, actually. He was a tyrant. It was you.
He had a wonderful time, really. So Anthony, seriously though, what did you learn while you were in Bethel service?
Many different things. Theocratically, spiritually, you gain so much. Aside from the skills I learned in printing, theocratically, to spend time with brothers and sisters with decades of years serving Jehovah God, those who've been missionaries in the travelling work, members of the governing body who pass through, to be with these brothers and sisters is a marvellous blessing.
What about the spiritual programs in Bethel?
That's ever so helpful, yes. Of course, your work assignment's very important, but much of the work that happens in Bethel is not of itself of a spiritual nature. It can be quite a mechanical kind of thing. So the spiritual program's essential. Each morning worship gets the day off to an excellent start. And then, of course, on Monday evening, the family watchtower study, and sometime the special talks that are given. Again, they're a superb blessing.
Now, during the time you were with us, we had to stop printing for a while because of doing some alterations in the factory. And so Germany took on our work. And so we sent you and another brother to help them with the printing. What was that like, that privilege?
That was wonderful. We went for 3 months to the Germany branch, to Selters, and help them there with their printing. But it was the blessings that came along with that. Aside from spending time there in Germany, shortly after the Berlin Wall had come down, was very exciting. Lots of Trabants in the car park from East European brothers who'd come over to help out. The one remarkable thing, we were able to spend an evening with 2 of the Kusaro sisters, those who are in the Purple Triangles video. And that's something I've never forgotten. To see the demonstration of their family's faithfulness is something I'll never forget. But I wouldn't have had that opportunity had I not been in Bethel service.
Yeah, we just take a little moment there, because I remember you telling me, you and Matthew, when you came back, they had like a filing cabinet with all the stuff in, but particularly that exercise book that was done by the brother who was executed. Could you tell the brothers about that?
Yes, one of the sons, I think it was Wolfgang, was mentioned in their life experience. He was executed, and shortly before he was executed, he sent a letter back to his family. And in the letter was a plan he'd drawn of his garden. And in his plan he'd carefully laid out what he wanted in each of the flower beds and how he was going to have his house. And he'd sent that back to his family and said, just keep this for me, for the resurrection.
Amazing, yes, to see that actually in your own hands. So what would you say, how did Bethel service benefit you after 10 years?
In too many ways to recount, really. It was a marvellous privilege that I'd wholeheartedly recommend to anybody, particularly theocratically and spiritually. I was raised in Leicestershire in a small town English congregation. And of course you get your own perspective of the organisation through your congregation and the circuit, and you think that's it. And you hear about the International Brotherhood, but you perhaps haven't seen it. Going to Bethel, suddenly your horizons are broadened enormously, 360 degrees. You get the full view of Jehovah's organisation, and we had opportunity to visit other branches whilst we were there, and that certainly broadened my horizons.
So what would you say to any of the parents or the youngsters of your audience today who are thinking about their future?
Well, to parents, I would say set the goal of full-time service, and personally recommending Bethel service before your children, your youngsters. It's a decision I've never regretted, and I know that hundreds of others feel exactly the same way. It opens up opportunities that you can't really imagine until you experience them. But to young ones themselves, definitely pursue Bethel as a goal.
Very good. So if you're a bit nervous to speak to me, sometimes brothers think that we're going to clap them in irons and take them to Bethel tonight. Have a chat to Anthony Harper, who's here as the assistant hall overseer. He's easy to talk to, and ask him any question you like about Bethel and what a wonderful overseer he had, and he's sure to answer that. Thanks very much, Anthony. Just something that happened just 2 weeks ago. We've had people coming through to see the new printing press from different worldly companies, and we had particularly one company here from Rotherham came to see the new printing press, and this production director has now been back 5 times with his staff. And he's on a group called the Web Press Forum, which is part of the British Printing Industry Federation, which are the main printers in the UK, very big companies like Quebecor, R.R. Donnelly. They print things like Homes and Gardens, Vanity Fair, Cosmopolitan, all these top magazines and stuff like that. And they telephoned us and they said, look, we've got a Web Press Forum in 2 weeks' time. Could we please come and have a tour of your facilities in Watchtower? So we thought, well, yes, that's fine. We arranged that. So 2 weeks ago they came in, and they came and looked at our place and so on. It was very interesting. Some of the people, you could tell, didn't want to be there, and they were a bit frosty at first. But after they'd been there half an hour, they really thawed out. We had some excellent discussions with these people who are top production directors of these companies, people that you wouldn't normally speak to in the industry, or in the ministry, rather. Afterwards, they wrote a little report in the trade press, the Print Week, saying that the BPIF went round the immaculately maintained factory and efficient operation of Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like this. But in the evenings, in talking with these men, we went back to the seminar and sat in on the seminar with them. One of the men said, look, he said, I was earning £70,000 a year when I was 22. He said, and yet he said, talking to your young men on the machine, they have something that I don't have. He said, you people have got it right, and I'd like to know more about it. It was also interesting, we had a meal with 25 of these chief printers around a big table in one of the function rooms at the Hilton Hotel afterwards. And just before the meal starts, the head of the BPIF came down to me and he said to me, Peter, would you ask grace for us, please? So he tinged on the old wine glass and we asked a blessing on the meal in Jehovah's name. So that was a really good witness that we gave to them. So it's great that we get opportunities to meet people like this because of the work that we're doing in Bethel. The last thing that we want to talk about is those paying attention to divine instruction are richly blessed. Coming back to that point that we made this morning. Our last passage of Scripture we'd like to look at is Psalm 19 and verses 7 through to 11. Psalm 19 verse 7. It says, the law of Jehovah is perfect, bringing back the soul. The reminder of Jehovah is trustworthy, making the inexperienced one wise. Have you noticed in history and in life that each successive generation makes the same mistakes, don't they? They never learn one from the other. Now, for us in the truth, it doesn't have to be that way. Jehovah's been around for 6,000 years. He's the manufacturer. He knows what works. So we can be wise, even though we are inexperienced, if we simply trust that Jehovah gives us a perfect law. Then it says, the orders from Jehovah are upright, causing the heart to rejoice. The commandment of Jehovah is clean, making the eyes shine. Isn't that true, particularly of our young people? You look at the young brothers and sisters that we have in our audience here. Haven't they got shiny eyes? Have you noticed one newspaper gave the definition of enthusiasm? They said, the gleam in the eye of a Jehovah's Witness on the doorstep. That was their definition of enthusiasm. Isn't it true, you see? People notice our youngsters and even us oldsters on the ministry that we're enthusiastic about what we do. The truth makes the eyes shine. Verse 9. The fear of Jehovah is pure, standing forever. The judicial decisions of Jehovah are true. They are proved altogether righteous. Yes, whatever Jehovah God asks us to do is absolutely right. It's on the money, isn't it? We'll only be benefited by following Jehovah's law. Yeah, you can pursue other things in life. Like that man said to us, look, he said, I earn £70,000 a year. He said, and now I realize that the most important things in life, he said, is the family. I said, are you married? He said, I was until 2 years ago, he said, and I split up with my wife. He said, it breaks my heart every day, and I realize that money is no answer to that. Isn't that true? So what does it say here? They're more to be desired than gold, yes, than much refined gold, and sweeter than honey, and the flowing honey of the combs. Yes, serving Jehovah is a very sweet way of life.